You're listening to Neurodivergent Mates. Hello and welcome to another episode of Neurodivergent Mates. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, joined with my main man, Photon John. What's going on, brother?
I'm having one of those days. Lots of deliveries and whatnot. I've discovered today gets very excited over new appliances years old.
Oh, really? Oh, it's that,
I got a new fridge, a new bar fridge. I got a new fridge for my mum because she needed one.
Yeah, cool, man.
Unpacking.
Nice. Oh, man. Well, I've just been at like a conference for the past 2 days on Thursday and Friday. And I just finished it like on the Friday and I was stuffed, man. Hey, just so much information overload, you know what I mean? But it was really cool. But anyway, I reckon we should get stuck into this. So today what we're going to be covering is Neuro-Impact and the importance of neurodivergence leadership. With my good friend Maz Power. I better take her off mute there. I'll get you sorted. Maz, what's going on, my friend?
Will, my legend. And John, this is so much fun. I'm watching you. You've actually got a backstage. Like, this is just awesome.
Yeah,
I could actually just listen to you two chat all day.
It's a pity we don't have like a green room, like a proper backstage where we could have like beers and, you know, like at like comedy things and that, how like the other comedians are backstage and all of that.
Just watching.
Yeah,
but
totally.
Look, it's as close as you can get, considering that we're online, you know, here live. It's awesome. I'm really, really impressed. But it's great to be here with you both. And yeah, Will, last week, that was awesome. The conference, I'm still buzzing.
Totally, man. Totally. But what
what was it around?
Oh, well, the conference was it's called Thriving at Work. So there was a lot of HR leaders, business leaders, neurodivergent leaders. And it was actually interesting. Maz and I actually got up and did a talk around or a panel around neurodivergence. And a big shout out to Claire and Sophie, if they're listening, for putting on such an awesome event. And hello to anyone who's listening, maybe.
And Natalie and Barry, of course, who were with us as well. It was a good conversation. But all the conversations, I thought, such a diversity, speaking of neurodiversity, but a diversity of thinking, of perspectives, of story sharing. That was a really big one for me. But I don't know about you, Well. I tend to get a little bit shy, awkward, introverted, believe it or not, when I'm in a big space like that.
I do.
And yet this community, the Serenity Collective, every time I walk away with, I know it's going to sound #cringy, but such a full heart because of the authenticity, that there's really genuine vulnerability and safety that they create. So far out. I could rave about it all day.
Yeah,
but I won't.
totally.
Talk about leadership.
To keep it short, it was awesome. But
it was awesome.
Let's move on.
We're going back next year.
Totally. And I probably will know because it seems like a lot of people keep coming back every year, which is a real
there's a strong collective interest.
Yeah. So I'm excited to go back there.
Are you in that collective now? Goodwill. We've nabbed you in, have we? We've reeled you in.
I'm hoping so. We'll see what's going on. But what we might do, before we move on, we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping with any new listeners. So if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. We're available on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, and we're also available on anywhere where you listen to your podcasting platforms. Also, too, if you haven't already done so, please check out the work we're doing with Neurodiversity Academy by visiting neurodiversityacademy.com. Also, too, with a lot of our podcasts, we can sometimes be talking about some hard-hitting stuff. So just a bit of a warning, some discussions may be triggering. If you need help, please reach out to a loved one or call emergency services. We are not doctors. This is a space for sharing experiences and strategies. Also, too, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask during the live session, which we're in right now, please feel free to type it in on our social media platforms there, as I'm sure we'd love to hear it. Photon John, what did you think of that one today, brother?
Nailed it.
Nailed it, mate. There you go, mate.
You guys are nailing this. I'm just
what do they say? If there's a will, there's a way, right?
Multiple ways, I would say, my friend. Multiple ways. Absolutely.
Totally. But I tell you what, the star of the podcast today is you, Maz. So, you know, like we're talking about, a big thing that you're really passionate about is Neuro-Impact, and especially around leadership. And you and I get on the phone for hours sometimes. I'm pretty sure it's hours because my phone is like my ear is hurting after a while.
Usually cleaned by the time you and I chatted.
Yeah, totally.
Are we saying, Will, is I need to buy you a hands-free headset for your birthday? Is that?
Could be. Yeah. But you know what, Ray? Like, I still don't use. I never use the hands-free that much. Hey, I don't know. I just never. You know how like sometimes people still will buy a book when they could get an audio book. I'll still put the phone to my ear instead of putting in earplugs, or you know I don't know.
That's impressive. Well, I'm a multitasker all the way from way back, so it is earphones or no conversation with Maz.
Okay, so I got to. I do.
Otherwise, you're going to get the awkward shoulder thing while I'm, over here doing something and then drop on the floor. So you know if I haven't got my earphones or they're not charged, because that's what's going to happen.
Sorry, I'm going to say one thing, right? Because I was watching the 90s info commercial ads from back in the day, right?
Yeah.
You know how there'll just be these weird things.
Like Danos Direct type of thing?
Yeah, Danos Direct and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they had this thing where you could have this thing that went over your head, sort of like how I've got this, but it had a clip thing where you could put your phone and have it in like that, and then be talking and all of this stuff while you're on the phone and everything. Yeah, but it just looks so tacky, and it was just so funny. But I was like, oh, I suppose so. That's the 90s, you know.
Well, if you've got any 90 friends listening, drop into the comments, I reckon, because I'm sure there's some different Danos Direct moments that we can all remember over time. I like that one. I don't remember it, but I like it.
Totally. What we might do a shout out to Rebecca. Rebecca, thank you so much for showing your love. That was a person that we met at the conference, also doing some really cool work with Beaumont people, I believe.
Oh, Rebecca Reinhardt. Hello.
That's the one. Thank you. Cool. Thank you so much for shooting through. So what we might do, Maz, if you could share a little bit about yourself, we'd love to hear about it.
A little bit about Maz. I like that.
And just a heads up, we don't have all day, so just try and keep it short, right?
I like that it says, tell us a bit about yourself. Okay.
Yeah, totally. We're being direct.
Let me wrap that up with be direct. Okay. Wow. Now we've got instructions. Maz gets very anxious about that question. Tell us a bit about yourself. But to give some context, I used to get more worried about that question prior to my ADHD diagnosis. So let's start there. So in terms of neurodivergence, my profile is ADHD combined type. And I only discovered that in my early 40s. I was part of the COVID crew that went, oh, maybe this all applies to me too. Despite the fact that I'm a clinical psychologist, I hadn't picked up on it, and neither had anybody that I'd ever interacted with. It was only that I was working with a couple of really good friends who were also exploring their own neurodivergence at the time, and kind of picked up on a few of my quirks, and the typical big, long diagnostic process. It was tick the boxes with flying colors. So now that I know that about myself, I'm okay with sort of sharing that, the about me section is kind of multi-hyphenated. So on paper, I'm a clinical psychologist, or that's my background and my training, but actually my area of research is more in, I would say, positive psychology and human flourishing and functioning. I've always been really obsessed with the question of what makes for a meaningful life. So that's led me to study both academically and just vicariously, purpose. transcendent emotions, mattering, belonging, joy, all the good things, really. And in terms of how that shows up and translates into work, it's pretty eclectic. I do have a clinical practice still that I run online, but the majority of my time is spent across different platforms. Will, you and you've come onto my podcast, Classroom 5.0.
Totally. It's awesome.
It is. It's good fun. It's good fun. I really kind of in that typical hyperactive multi-potentialite, leaning into strengths now and recognizing that it's okay not to have that linear kind of career that is expected. And so rather than sort of being a chameleon and trying to sort of fit into a box depending on what room I walk into, for me, that diagnosis has really helped to be quite proud in being multi-hyphenated. I co-founded and am the CEO of a company called the Posify Group. We've had lots of iterations. Will, you've been involved in that process since we founded in 2018. But today we're a neuro-affirming psychology coaching and consulting company. And we're really interested in reducing unnecessary human suffering and activating potential, particularly for neurodivergent leaders. So we do that in organizations, supporting with workplace webinars, with workshops and keynotes. So really that sort of information piece and supporting teams there. We work largely with individuals. So lots of either individual or group-based coaching. We've got some programs for neurodivergent leaders and their allies. And then we've retained our youth piece or our next gen piece, which is where we started.
Nice,
so we're really interested in that future fit question.
Awesome.
So that's a little bit about me. A little bit, hopefully.
Yeah, no, that was, you did very well.
Direct?
You did very well there. Yes, very direct. You did very well there.
Not bad for late at night.
You did. It's roughly about 6:41 here. So, Photon John.
It is.
If I could just interject for a second, you mentioned combined type. Just for anyone listening who doesn't understand what that means, could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, great point. So with ADHD, diagnostically speaking, we look at inattentive is one type, hyperactive is another, and combined is lucky me, double whammy both. We sort of think in the literature that combined type is less common in females. That said, anecdotally and definitely with women that I speak to, I think that that's probably more to do with our lack of understanding and our diagnostic, we need to really pick up the slack there on how hyperactivity presents in women. So a lot of the tools we use to diagnose ADHD are based on male samples. So I think over time that will probably change, but that's the combined type. I should also say a part of my neurodivergent profile, which I probably don't talk about often enough because it's not one of those things you kind of wave around. I was identified as a young person as being gifted. And so that kind of takes me into a profile we call twice exceptional. So where you've got that giftedness intellectually, and then there's also neurodivergence. For me, that shows up with ADHD and not officially across the line with diagnosis, but probably dyscalculia as well. So I see numbers quite differently, and I have no concept of time, which is why Will is always kindly keeping me on time.
Good. But do you know what, right? And I remember you speaking about how you're twice exceptional, 2E, some people refer to it as well. And I'm twice exceptional as well. And for me, and I'm about my story and all that type of stuff. For me, that was incredibly hard to grasp that concept because I was told, because I was told I was, and it wasn't called twice exceptional back when I first got diagnosed with dyslexia.
No, it wouldn't have been.
I was just told I had an extremely high IQ for a kid my age. So being told that you're very, intelligent and smart type of thing, that was sort of weird because then I'd be going back into school, failing miserably and thinking, what the hell's
Where's
going
the congruence here?
What's going on? But I think as I've gotten older, now I can start to see where those things come into place. Because we can work to our own strengths. And it's like, oh my God, my strengths are so strong here and my thinking is so strong. So, it's definitely another sort of area. Have we had anyone come on and talk about twice exceptional yet, Photon John?
No, I don't think so. And that whole concept you were just talking to as well about, this weird sort of dichotomy between being really good at some stuff in the school system, and really bad at other stuff in it. Sort of really speaks to the brokenness of the system. But that's something I experienced as well. To the point where when I did do really well, the teachers were suspicious.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
right. We see that a lot, actually.
Yeah, I won't go into it too deeply because I've spoken about it a couple of times on the podcast. But like, there was I failed music really hard just because of the way they were teaching me, despite the fact I'm a lifelong musician. But when there was a part of the semester where you had to write a song, they refused to believe that I could have written that song, and my mom had to come down to school and all this kind of stuff. So, I've mentioned it a few times because it seems to be a pattern that we talk about a lot with education, where it's like I always get like an A+ in social sciences because it was just a subject that I was particularly interested in and happy to hyper focus on, for that particular project and stuff. So. Yeah, it's an interesting pattern that I keep seeing across all different kinds of neurodivergences too. So I think that's why it's the system that is probably the issue.
Yeah, and just I know we're going on to the next question, but to pick up on that, it is an area I'm really passionate in supporting in terms of our youth programs. That's what we double down on because here in Australia, at least, we don't actually have any formal procedures, policies, ways of identifying and then supporting twice exceptional kids in Australia. Yeah. And that's a real problem because one, you got untapped potential. I mean, look at you two, you're stellar humans and we're not giving them the pathways to be able to really shine, to understand where their struggles are, but also understand their strengths. So there's a lot of really unnecessary suffering in that community. Both my kids are twice exceptionals actually. So very proud about celebrating theirs. It's just giftedness as an adult. I think it must just be our conditioning as when we were younger is not something you went bragging about. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing with regards to that is that when we're not identifying these strengths or these kids for the great things they do, and I sort of spoke about this at the conference, right? This is where mental health then comes into play. And,
absolutely.
For me, it was sort of like, why can I do all of this great stuff in sport and creativity, but then when it comes to math and English and all of that stuff, straight over my head. And it's like, I really try, for me, I'm really big on trying to get across like, look, man, don't worry about that stuff. Let's worry about these things that really, that's what's going to make you the person that, pardon me, you can be type of thing, But in saying that, we should probably talk a little bit about your work. I think the cool thing when you and I were talking before we went on to the conference, especially around Neuro-Impact and a lot of the stuff you're doing. So, I want to hear a little bit more about that, and then we can go a little bit more in depth into that.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, gosh, there's lots, but are you talking about the new network that we've just launched, the Neuro-Impact network?
Well, look, nice. To tell you the truth, when he reached out and he said, hey, I'm launching this, I'm thinking, well, let's get it on the podcast so we can plug it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, you're beautiful, Will.
Yeah, totally, man. So, let's plug this shit, right?
Let's plug it. No, I am really excited, actually. So Neuro-Impact Network is a community, a hybrid community that we are creating to support neurodivergent leaders. And it's really come out of a series of programs, actually, that we've been rolling out over the years. I say we at Posify. One of the first ones was Messy Magic. So when I first discovered my own neurodivergent profile as an ADHD woman who, by society standards and my own standards is pretty happy and functioning, flourishing life, I could find a lot about what was wrong with me and how to support what was wrong with me in terms of my neurodivergent profile. But as a strengths-based, solution-oriented kind of gal, I was really struggling to find out, okay, great, but how do I leverage my strengths and how do I get to know what those look like? And then how do I re-author some of the stories that I used to have in my head that were really misplaced, like stories like you guys spoke to some of these, that gap of noticing, what your potential you believe to be and then where the performance is, or, maybe I'm just lazy and that's why I don't turn up on time. So anyway, all of that sent me down the rabbit hole. We did a lot of market research and developed Messy Magic. But out of that, it was like there was another stop, right? So that brings me to the point of what is the work that we're doing. And I think in terms of supporting neurodivergent people in general, but leaders as well, it's looking at traditionally speaking, we've looked at the struggles within our neurodivergent community, and that is really important because we know there is a lot of unnecessary suffering. So it's not to take away at all about, all of the work that's happening there, but a little bit like positive psychology has helped to fill the whole continuum of mental health. I'm really interested in now leaning into going, okay, great. Well, how can we come together as a community and share insights and lived experience and on the job, stories, case studies, problems, to really leverage our strengths, both individually and then collectively as a group of neurodivergent leaders. So that's why the Neuro-Impact network has been developed. And I'm really excited because so far the humans coming in are brilliant and from so many different walks of life, doing all sorts of really cool things. I would say that we're united, and I am quite intentional about this, but united by a desire to use our differences, our skills, our perspectives, our strengths to create really sustainable impact in the world. So we've got a lot of people in the tech sector joining us. We've got a lot of creative types, some entrepreneurs and founders as well. So yeah, I'm really excited. It's a selfish project, I'm not going to lie, because I love learning from other people and hanging out with really cool, creative, innovative folk. So I'm really excited.
You go first.
Can I just ask, you talked about a lot of sectors that we tend to know about that neurodivergent people tend to thrive in, like the tech and whatnot. What's the most unexpected sector you've had someone come from in terms of, a good leader who would be someone who can push in that? So
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I go on that as well? But I'll let Maz answer that. I'll say something shortly, but you go, Maz.
I'm struggling to answer it because it's genuinely from a really diverse crew. Hey, and I think that also speaks, I know we've got another question later about, where do neurodivergent leaders pop up? It speaks to the idea that, traditionally we've kind of, I guess, pigeonholed our assumptions of where neurodivergent people might thrive. So I think a lot of people
the stereotype is what I'm getting at.
Stereotype, of the autistic person, working in engineering or STEM, and that is true, and that's great, and that's accurate, but it's not all. So we've got people joining us from performing arts, sports, so high. What's it called where they're jumping off buildings and things? What do you call that? High risk, high impact. What's it called? Someone help me out. It's too late at night.
That would be extreme
sports. Thank you. Yes. Emergency services. So a lot of ADHD people actually really thrive when they're in emergency. I've got somebody who's a surgeon who's wanting to join. We've got representation from, the climate tech sector as well. Really an artist, a really diverse group of humans, teachers, which is great. That's what we wanted to
do for you, Maz, if you want. I should pretend. So I got invited to it was like a brainstorming session with the water industry. The water industry put on this thing, and it was a full room. This. Yeah, packed with people. I think there might have been about 50 something people in the room, right? And they brought the leaders from the sector together about how they can potentially grow neurodiversity within the water sector. So we had breakout rooms where it was interesting. I never had seen anything, and they're like, how far behind the 8 ball are we? And I'm like, well, to tell you the truth, you're not behind the 8 ball at all because no one else is doing this.
And designing up. I love that. That. That's every program that we've ever created and delivered has always been a co-design. So the programs we did with youth were always involving the youth and asking what they noticed and what was working well for them and where the gaps were. So we've always been industry-led, youth-led, and now, our community-led in neurodivergent leadership. So, of course, I've got curriculum that is mapped out according to what we've got in the evidence around what supports neurodivergent leaders to manage their struggles and really leverage their strengths. But look, I'm really happy to hold that lightly and to be informed by who's coming into the network, and I want it to be a space where people can come together and feel like they can play in a way that's really inclusive and exciting and thought-provoking and vulnerable and authentic.
Can I say
all the good words?
Yeah, totally. And I totally agree with you 100%, Maz. And like, that's the biggest thing for me is the community.
Yeah.
I think that there's so much to learn from the community. So there might be certain things that I'm struggling. You know, I don't know everything. You know, I'm not saying that I know. Yeah, I'm not saying that I do, right? And sometimes it's interesting. I feel like I can sometimes be open with the community about stuff that I might not be able to be open about with people not from outside the community. And I'm not judged. I'm actually, we can sit down and have good discussions about certain things and be like, oh my God, I go through that. Oh my God, such and such. Do you know what I mean? And it's so valuable. I think community is key.
And I guess that's for me, one of the parts I get excited about is prior to going to psychology, I studied counseling, psychotherapy, and group facilitation. So I have a real love for bringing people together and making sure that the conditions are right for psychological safety. Because, you know, we tend to be a community that can sometimes overshare, and that's okay. So it's very intentional about creating that space where people have that ability to do a deep dive, but feel like they've got some boundaries around what that looks like. So it's going to be fun. I'm excited.
Yeah,
we've already sort of soft launched, but we officially kick off in July with our founding network members. So if you're interested, definitely get in touch because I'd love to have a conversation and see if it's
I'm
the right fit.
looking forward to looking into it a bit more, Maz. I'm pretty excited.
Good.
But moving on from that, what impact do neurodivergent leaders bring to the table? You know, you've sort of touched a little bit on this, but I think we could probably go a little bit more in depth. Yeah,
definitely. Well, I think you could probably just look at the good humans hosting this podcast, and there's a little bit of insight, right? But in all seriousness, you know, it's so well deserved, and I love what you're doing. The impact that neurodivergent leaders are creating, you know, the problem, it's not captured anywhere. And yet it's captured and seen everywhere. So I think the majority of people who think about neurodivergent leaders, probably those outliers come to mind, or those really high profile people. So, Richard Branson's been very open about dyslexia and more recently ADHD. And our comedian here in Australia is coming out and her big show is coming on stage. So we've got the creatives represented and Greta Thunberg and her climate activism. And so people sort of go, oh, well, it's okay for them, but then that's all. And yet the reality is, if we look at those stats again, so just the tech sector, for example, we know that 54% of people working in the tech sector identify as neurodivergent. And if you think about the different, it's huge, right? Especially when you think, we think of neurodiversity to be sort of the 20% in the general population, then you've got a whole industry tech. And I would argue that a lot of entrepreneurs, in fact, I think I saw a statistic recently that was saying 36%.
I thought it was 40%. It
could
be 30
representation.
Oh, I don't know about. I thought I saw something the other day where it was like 40, but you could be right. I'm not sure with it. It seems to change.
We branch that out, it seems to change. And this is the thing. So we're just learning, because if you combine that then with our knowledge that there's a lot of adults who are coming into understanding their own brain-based differences later in life, and we can talk about that if you're interested in why that is the case. But there's a lot of leaders doing really good work who, one, maybe don't even know that they are neurodivergent, and two, if they do know, part of the thing that I'm really wanting to move the needle on and change is the stigma associated with sharing. So I think as we start to continue these conversations that you guys are doing such a beautiful job of hosting, raising awareness and seeing different neurodivergent minds role modeled, then we're going to see more of a representation, more stories, and a better understanding of what our impact is. But look, I can roughly say, while you will not find a research paper that says what are the neurodivergent leaders' strengths and where are they seen, we do know there are some research papers that have looked at how military combat leaders, for example, with ADHD, when given the right psychoeducation about their differences, when given the right environmental conditions to thrive for their brain-based differences, and when given a coach for an accountability, actually outperform their non-ADHD military combat I guess
That's
peers.
interesting.
Yeah, in terms of making decisions on ethical dilemmas. So, neurodivergent people have really specific, unique strengths, which is a whole podcast in its own right. And I think for me, what's exciting is helping leaders in particular, but neurodivergent people in general, to not just understand and manage their struggles through accommodations. Like we said, that's important, but also to really get to know what their unique, their own unique value proposition is, and to double down on that in a way that is really meaningful and creates change. I like to think of us as like the different kind of difference makers in the world. That's probably I should have started there.
No problem at all.
Can I just attach to that as I know a lot of, I know you guys aren't the problem, but a lot of people don't see music as work or an industry. But
I do.
As a local musician, local-ish, I've toured all over the country, and I started in my last band, which I recently left after 5 years. But I started to be more and more open about being neurodivergent in interviews. Through the music itself, and then I started saying things on stage. I'm not really someone who announces, "Oh, this song is about this," but just a couple of them I would just say a little something beforehand. And I started noticing. I remember the first time I did it at a venue in Brisbane, and just all these hands went up, and I wasn't even saying who is. I was just saying this song's about having autism, and all these, and I like physically people put their hands up and were yelling out, and I realized, oh, okay, no one's doing this,
And no one's doing this, and good on you. That's brilliant.
Funny because sometimes being a leader can just be as simple as that. And so now I'm connected with all of the other neurodivergent, a lot of the other neurodivergent musicians in the local Brisbane scene. I know I started doing it when we went on tour all over the country, and I was seeing the same thing in every city, Sydney, Melbourne, all the rural places that we went up far north and everything. So it can be quite simple sometimes. It's not complicated.
It's not complicated.
A leader,
you
because
are so right.
You're just leading. You're just trying to take the conversation or the industry forward. And sometimes it's just as simple as saying something.
And can I say as well, like sometimes what I'm seeing with or the importance of neurodivergent leaders is there's a few different things, right? They're influencing the next generation. Do you know what I mean? So, and that
can I add to that? Probably vice versa, Will, as well. The next generation is influencing us.
The next generation is very encouraging.
Oh man, they're showing off, aren't they? They are standing loud and proud. Yeah.
But I suppose, and I always go back to this. I'll never forget, especially when I was writing my book all these years ago. I was talking to this guy in Hong Kong. And he was talking to me about the CTO from the company he works at is dyslexic. And the guy I was talking to wasn't dyslexic, but the CTO was. And he was just talking to me about how his boss is awesome and he's so open-minded and all that. So it's not necessarily them influencing other neurodivergent people, influencing other, neurotypical people as well to be like more open-minded to neurodivergent people as a whole, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's where the role of allies comes in. Hey,
totally. Allies are huge. And sorry, Fred on John, you go, mate.
Oh, just the amount of workplaces I remember being in pre-diagnosis where I was going through really serious mental health struggles as a result of being forced to behave in ways that weren't natural to me. And forget neurodivergence, just mental health in general, the lack of seriousness, attached to those issues by bosses and leaders in certain industries is really detrimental. And then if you add being neurodivergent on top of that, I thought I was going through like depression cycles. I was actually going through autistic burnout and ADHD burnout. They were very intense. But I'm being told, yeah, I just, you're not throwing up. Why are you not at work?
Take a pill. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. You touched on such an important point there. I think what's really interesting to your point around where is the representation. I don't know if you know this, Will, but my prior career or life, I should say, was in acting and performance and the arts.
No, I
And
didn't know about that.
yeah,
it wouldn't surprise me because you seem very on stage.
Yeah, that was well, they always say you end up figuring out how to pull it all together in the end, right? So, and the representation there, I think back to a lot of my colleagues, and I know, we've all kept in touch, but that creative brain type and those really exceptional performers, and the open struggles that they've shared around mental illness, there's a real correlation, I think, with the creatives who show up in ways and gift that in the world. So it'd be really interesting to do a little bit of a deep dive into those industries specifically. I think we're probably underreporting representation in particular industries because they attract our strengths. I mean, you guys are the first to acknowledge that you want to go where the dopamine flows, and if the thing that you like to do is create music, then that's amazing. You're going to do really, really well there. Might not do so well if you're put in an accounting firm, though.
Yeah. And it's about finding what works best, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then having the people to support you there too. But
Totally.
I agree, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of raising that awareness and helping workplaces and organizations and neurotypical leaders to understand that this isn't something that you can just sleep off. And, a mental health day is not going to prevent or support somebody whose brain-based differences mean that they are more prone to burnout from those environmental factors and all of the things that go into creating that. So I'm sorry to hear that's been a part of your story. It's been a part of mine too, and it's something I care very passionately about preventing with people.
And I think
it was the reason for a lot of job hopping, which I think you alluded to earlier.
Absolutely,
Yep. I had a lot of that when I was younger because I would come in, be hyper focused, loved learning new things, be excellent at it, and have trouble giving a shit 3 months later.
Relate to that. I was known as the build and bolt girl until I figured out what was going on.
Wow. That's interesting.
I can relate to that.
That's
that sprint mentality.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So we'll move on to I actually did have something to say, but I just had a full ADHD mind blank there, so I've completely forgotten.
It'll come back.
Yeah,
it'll
come back. Yeah. So no need to apologize, right? So what's the current status quo when it comes to neurodivergent leadership?
I'm going to give you my interpretation of an answer to that question, but I'm not sure that I understand exactly what you're interested in. In fact, let me just ask that. When you say the status quo of neurodivergent leadership, tell me more about that question. What would be helpful to know about?
What's the prevalence currently of neurodivergent leaders in different industries without us trying to bring it forward and more into the open? You know what I mean? Like,
Gotcha. Yeah.
Where are they right now?
Where are our stats? Okay, so in addition to sort of talking about the industries that we were speaking to where there is a higher prevalence rate, so we know within our startup sector, our tech sector, I think probably in our performing sectors, in our arts, definitely in those high risk roles, so emergency sector, there's a higher rate. What's really interesting is the paradox. So the research of the unemployment rates, which I would say that the research to date has focused most heavily on the autistic community. And I imagine a lot of your listeners are familiar with that research. And if anybody wants to know more, I'm really happy to point you in the direction of some research articles and papers to point to. And so what we end up with is this almost like a this or that situation. And nothing is ever this or, well, very few things, I hate to say nothing, is ever, because that's kind of a little bit this or that in itself, isn't it? This or that. And so I think, again, the more that we start to understand neurodiversity as an actual spectrum and continuum, and the more that we start to see the unique strengths and perspectives and skills and contributions within our community, I think we'll get a better picture of where our neurodivergent leaders are sitting. But for those listening, I'd really be curious to hear from you, whether or not you want to throw it into the comments if you're joining us live, or even if you just want to take a moment to reflect. I wonder if you can have a think about the different people that you've known in your life who might either identify themselves as neurodivergent or maybe have kids who are neurodivergent, because that's often a little bit of a giveaway. All of our neurodivergent profiles, there's a genetic predisposition to.
Sorry to butt in there. I did want to say, I don't know about you, but I find say at that conference, for example, I was surprised how many people were coming up to me afterwards and they're like, oh, my son or daughter, and I'm pretty sure I am too. And that it's not just there. I've seen that nearly every place I speak at, people who listen to the podcast, who know the work we're doing. It's blowing my mind.
They're having aha moments.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't know the word for it, but it's like it's happening a lot now.
Yeah,
like it's becoming, and like I think as well, a lot of people in who have been working certain jobs for their whole life are now going, oh my God, now this makes sense. Now I can see why we need to really focus on neurodiversity in the workplace.
I've had multiple friends get diagnosis through listening to the podcast. Not
cool.
Not diagnosed, but like they've listened to the podcast.
Explore the pathway.
Okay,
and they're like,
I should probably actually go and get this checked out.
Yeah. Well, and that's particularly happening for women.
And I know their lives are better.
Absolutely. Because again, even if you're not in that space where you're languishing, and even if you're not in that space where you're suffering, but to understand why you behave the way you behave, to have that, that full identity piece, and to know why parts of you show up in different ways. We know from the research for women in particular, without a diagnosis, there's a real risk of internalizing the brain-based differences as personal flaws, and the collateral damage that comes with that. We see a lot more imposter syndrome. We see a lot more low self-esteem, mental health challenges associated with that. Women not stepping into leadership roles and taking careers because they're afraid that they won't be able to show up. Or we see perfectionistic and overcompensatory strategies. I know myself, I definitely flitted between the two, which was, a large portion of my own sort of burnout, and coming up and then shying away and withdrawing when I felt like I wasn't understood, or I couldn't read the room, or I didn't quite know where I would fit in. And so the diagnosis piece, it's not just about traditionally speaking, it was looked at. I mean, I digress a little bit, but ADHD has only come into the DSM-5 in 2013 as a neurodevelopmental difference, for example. So prior to that, it was seen as a behavioral disorder that was to be treated and to be fixed. So the treatment protocol was, well, if we give kids, wasn't thought of as an adult, difference, because it wasn't a brain-based difference, it was a disorder. If we give kids behavioral charts and we use, that conditional behavioral therapy that, the Skinner days for any psychologists listening, then we'll kind of whack it out of them. So that's 2013. Like, my kids were alive then, and not just alive, but they were coming into getting their own diagnosis themselves. So we know now that, these neurodivergent profiles are genetic and largely inherited, and whether or not they express themselves to the point where somebody seeks out a diagnosis, most people will usually do that if there's sort of that struggle or that problem, as opposed to looking at it through the lens of, well, I'm doing well, but what does it look like if I could do even better, which is that that peak performance and human flourishing space that I'm really interested in. So I really do think we've got a lot of leaders who might be listening in going, well, yeah, I do have neurodivergent kids myself. Maybe there's something in this. And I would ask or encourage, implore those leaders to speak up, because, the more we can see, it helps. The more that we can see people like us reflected out in cool jobs, doing cool things, the more
owning cool companies.
Absolutely to that. The more that we can see our possibilities, and move towards those.
I say that because, and I'm not going to mention this person's name, or the company, because that would be a dead giveaway if I did. Now, there's a huge company here in Australia that has, it's a tech company, so it's almost a little bit like Guess Who, right?
I'm so playing this game with you. I'm like,
you
okay,
know what I mean? And this is like one of the
Tell
biggest tech companies to come out of Australia. They're
I know
doing
who you're
some
talking
amazing
about.
stuff
Bingo!
at the moment.
Bingo!
Put your hand down. But one of the co-founders from that is neurodivergent, right? And
is speaking about it publicly.
I have tried to sort of say, look, come on, get behind this, or get your company to be like the leaders in this. But they don't want to, because they don't want to be the poster. They don't want to be seen as the poster person.
Poster boy. Yeah.
Person.
And I can't,
no, I don't want to give away if they're male or female.
I totally. And do you know what?
Sorry. I just need to finish this. Right? Yeah. Now, the thing is that, okay, I get that they don't want to be the poster boy, but it's not about them being the poster boy. They can do a lot of stuff with their company. Their company to be able to show that they're behind neurodiversity. But, I see this company putting so much money in all these other areas, and it's sort of like, dude, man, you're letting down the team.
I agree.
I agree.
Sorry to interrupt, but can I just say how much I love that all three of us are saying, sorry to say, but can I just interrupt? That's three very self-aware ADHD people in a podcast together.
That's very true. Thank you for that recognition and acknowledgement, because yes, we're all sitting on our lips and our hands and everything, right? Especially this time of day.
But you touched the base a little bit on research before. Where is the research heading, do you think?
Yeah, that's another really interesting question. Look, the research does exist. There's a lot of conversation to say that it doesn't, and that we need more. We absolutely do need more. So again, let's hold two things side by side. But again, if you're interested in the research, please reach out to me, DM me, email me. I'm so happy to start your reading list with you. We've had, Professor Amanda Kirby, we've got Nancy Doyle doing incredible stuff in, neurodiversity in the workplace, the Canary Code coming out, of course. So lots of pieces coming together. I think in terms of where the research is going, my take on the literature to date has been, again, it's been very focused on that awareness piece. So what is neurodiversity? Why should we be talking about it? Some research into strengths, more research into struggles, and where the important unnecessary suffering lies, and what we should be doing about that. I'm really excited with the conversation growing to be contributing to the other part of that, to say, okay, cool, but what about in our neurodivergent population where there's flourishing? What's going on with those humans? How can we get to know a little bit about that and double down on it? And how can we take what we know about what's working well, and then learn from that and create some preventative support structures, systems, communities that help people to really sit and be radically accepting of their brain-based differences, to be able to put accommodations and adjustments in place, of course, for the struggles that each of us who is neurodivergent, as people we have, but neurodivergent people have very real struggles, and then look at, and then how do we leverage those strengths? How do we get you in the room with the right people who can hold space for you to do your brilliant? Because I don't think that we have a good enough representation in the literature. And I'm talking, the scientific literature here, not blogs that you're going to find on the internet, because they exist and they're really cool, by the way. But we need more empirical data. I'm a scientist by training, and I think while there's such a place for lived experience story sharing, I was reading just on a good friend, Grace Coolmer, future ADHD founder, her Instagram channel. She was talking about rejection sensitive disorder, and somebody got in and they were like, that's not even a thing. There's no science behind it. There's no empirical studies. It's like those two things are true, because the lived experience of our community says rejection sensitivity is absolutely a thing. But you go try finding any kind of protocol on that or scientific evidence, and you're going to struggle. And until we get the funding and the prioritization of neurodiversity into these bodies in our science community, where we are doing really rigorous peer-reviewed examination of the core things that support our struggles and leverage our strengths, I fear that we won't be taken seriously. And I'm all about us being taken really seriously. So I think it's about really advocating and helping people to understand why this is an important research topic, and to your point, Will, looking to different avenues as to how we can fund it, because it's not necessarily going to come out of the university sector. It might, but I think we need to accelerate.
Big business. For us, especially with Neurodiversity Academy, a big thing for us is to, we want to build this into a big business, and we want to make millions of dollars, so we can take some of that money and put it into things like like research and all of that type of stuff, into specific areas that we're trying to work on, if that makes so we can create training materials around that is legit. It's not just
absolutely that's evidence-based. Totally. At the moment we're still sitting in that very much evidence-informed space.
It's like the open space,
which is fine, and we need to get in there and we need to disrupt. I'm very passionate about measure what you treasure, but again, like, how do you replicate that, and how do you know whether or not it's suitable to replicate that and generalize that across different communities if we don't have the data? So I think we need both. We need that lived experience sharing and just being curious with each other and just knowing ourselves and knowing each other and trying things out, experimenting. But I really think that we deserve a space in the scientific community to double down on what's working well and where the support lies.
Totally.
But I think we do need to fix that ratio between research on struggles and research on strengths. I think it's out of whack currently. I think you were talking before about the lived experience side of things. I think where I personally tend to draw the line a bit is and let me say clearly, self-diagnosis is very helpful to a lot of people because clinical diagnosis can be long and drawn out, and very expensive and inaccessible.
I hate that.
I'm not saying I have any problem with self-diagnosis, but I think if you're going to talk lived experience in a way that creates data that people should pay attention to, I feel like it's better to be diagnosed if you're going to talk lived experience.
Interesting. Why is that? Can I ask?
Well, because you don't know yet, right? So I'm talking about like speaking as an authority on a particular topic. Like I see a lot of people on social media just sort of talking casually about, without a diagnosis about stuff that's kind of clinical and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying they can't be educated. I'm just saying when you're going to get into that nitty-gritty research, clinical kind of stuff, perhaps a diagnosis is a bit better for you to really, because then you get the literature. You get the support. You get to understand really what's going on with you, rather than just TikTok videos. So I think that can be a little bit more useful. So I tend to think if you're going to look at lived experience with people, diagnosed individuals can be a slightly better, more informed source of that kind of information. And people may disagree.
No. I'm so that's why I asked, tell me more about where you're coming from, because you've raised some really important points. I mean, that's why we have differential diagnosis in psychology, right? And we know that a lot of the, the features of neurodivergence can show up across different profiles. I mean, and different reasons. There was a time, I don't know if you guys remember, it must have been like late last year or maybe the year before, where everybody was kicking up about ADHD, saying, "Oh, this is being overdiagnosed, and it's just trauma. It's just trauma. Everything's trauma." And look, there's some truth in that.
And now they're complaining about trauma. Oh, trauma's overdiagnosed.
Right? So absolutely, I mean, we have diagnostic criteria for that reason. And I'm thinking a really interesting design. So here we go. Any research humans out there who want to follow up on this one, what would it look like if you split your groups up and looked at we call it qualitative, so lived experience or phenomenological studies. So those qualitative questions of what's this like for you, and collect the data from people who have self-identified and collect the data from people who have been diagnosed. Because I could flip the opposite on its head there, John, and say that I would guess, I haven't read the data. Oh, man. Sorry,
bless
guys,
you, Maz. No problem at all. No problem.
Speaking
at all.
too fast. Woo!
You're in the zone, my friend. You're in the zone.
I'm in the depth.
Now
hang on. The opposite.
Take a breath.
Take a breath. Take some water.
Yeah, have some water.
The opposite is true.
Yeah.
In that, I think that possibly people who've received a diagnosis may not have had a differential diagnosis. And with that, I will take a sip of water.
Take a sip of water. No problem at all.
But I'm going to need you to elaborate on that, because I'm not going to pretend that I understood exactly what you said.
Sorry, I went into psychobabble land. I do that. So differential diagnosis is the term that we use to understand why a feature might be showing up. So like we said before, there can be some overlap with different profiles. So, I mean, we know with ADHD and autism, for example, there genuinely is an overlap, and the features will kind of show up. It's interesting in ADHD, we tend to say, intense interests. And in autism, we talk about special interests. So there's that. But, things like working memory differences, for example. When we're looking at an ADHD diagnosis, we really want to be ruling out, for example, biological reasons that might be impacting somebody's memory function, or their differences in, language development. We want to be looking at trauma is a good one, because it does impact someone's nervous system. And we know that within our neurodivergent population, we've got highly sensitive nervous systems that respond to their sensory environment. And so the reason why assessments and diagnoses are so in-depth and they are complex is because we're trained to understand people's stories in a way that helps us to, unfortunately, we can't scan brains and go, there it is. Wouldn't that be cool? But we can sort of pull things apart and say, look, with everything that we've learned so far, it's most likely, or it's most probable that this is the piece that we want to double down on. And that's important, because we know that our support protocols, particularly when we're looking in that clinical space for people who might be coming into seeking support because of neurodivergence and or other mental health presentations, they do differ, and their efficacy or their ability to work differs based on whether or not you kind of got the diagnosis right. So it's complex. It's complex.
Yeah,
which is why I love it, because I love complex.
Yeah, and look, like I never speak in absolutes, But in my opinion on this whole self-diagnosis thing is just a generalization. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Hey, look, I've had to skip a few questions because we're coming to the end of the show, type of thing. So I thought we might come to this one. Why are allies important for neurodivergent leaders? Because we spoke a little bit about this, and they are important, especially for the community themselves as well. Can you sort of go a little bit on that, and can you keep it a bit tight for us?
Short. It's like, hey, Maz, can you make this 30 seconds? What's your elevator?
Well, it's a kind way of saying hurry the
be an ally because look, I can share personally that the allies in my life have really helped me to shortcut a lot of my own unnecessary suffering. So they've helped me at a personal level to go, Maz, come on, let's not get stuck in that story. And like, okay, yeah, true. It's like a rattle shock. I had a beautiful executive assistant for a while who I affectionately called Pegasus, because she was a part of my brain that I just otherwise didn't have. She was an ally. She really did her work to ask me questions, to be curious, to be open, to be non-judgmental. And I think these are all qualities of beautiful allies. And I also think that while I'm all for advocating as a neurodivergent person for our community, it can get really bloody exhausting. We were talking about this offline before we jumped on. It's like at the conference last week, I had a few people come up to me and say, Maz, I'd love you to come and speak, because neurodiversity, it's such a hot topic. Like, really glad to hear that my brain-based difference is your hot topic of the month. Should we do it tomorrow and not next year? Because we might have moved along to some other hot topic.
Yeah, don't want to miss
allies
out.
can kind of You know, like allies can kind of step in for us when we are tired, and they can hold space for us, and they can make sure that they're fighting the good fight alongside us. People in culture, HR. I'm thinking of coaches working with neurodivergent people. I'm thinking of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging humans. You know, like there's parents, coaches. Anybody can be an ally. Everybody should be an ally. But yeah, just being a good human.
Yeah, nah, and I think sometimes I see with the community, they sometimes push away the people trying to help, you know, and maybe sometimes the allies don't have all the answers, or they, you know, they're trying to learn. You know, don't push these people away. It takes like a lot of people to create change, not just you know, neurodivergent people themselves type of thing. And you know, I often see that, and sometimes people may frown against allies type of thing. And it's like, no, man, we should be embracing these people.
Absolutely.
You know, this is what's going to create this change and all of that there. But no, thank you so much. You did very well with that one, Maz. Congratulations. You did very well there. Was that
tight on time for you there, Will?
That was awesome. That was awesome.
You know, I could talk about this stuff for days. So good. I'm glad that was tight on time for you.
Yeah, you nailed that. Good job. Now, look, you know, you've got some awesome stuff happening. Where can people connect with you and your work?
Anywhere online. You're going to just have to type in my name and there I will be. So we are reimagining our Posify Group website, but otherwise you could normally go to www.theposifygroup.com.au. Currently that's going to redirect you to my page, which is mariannepower.com.au.
Awesome.
So yeah, jump on there, connect. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on less active on Instagram, but I'm trying to get back in amongst it. But before we wrap up, because I know we're going to get there, I would hate to leave the community listeners without a couple of just hot tips from Maz in terms of how to take care of yourself as a neurodivergent person and leader. Yeah. And I think because I should say, the stock standard stereotypical psychologist response to that would be look after your mental health. Absolutely. But where I'm really excited about the research and what I'm very passionate about as a neurodivergent leader and founder myself is in the recognition that real radical intentional self-care is so much more than just the thoughts in our heads. It's about understanding our unique nervous systems. It's about appreciating that our rest cycles look different and our energy flows are different. And that is particularly true for women who can be impacted by their hormonal changes. It's about recognizing that there's 50% of us struggle with chronic illness or chronic fatigue. And so we need to be taking our self-care so seriously. And I mean that at like an integrated level. You know, that's real leadership. We need to be looking after our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our spirits. You know, one of the biggest protective factors for our neurodivergent community, and they have captured this in literature, is the spirituality aspect and having that sense of creating something that is bigger than us and being connected to something that is bigger than us, which is why I love studying transcendent emotions. Who would have known, right? That worked out real well.
Awesome.
So just honoring that and finding people that you can connect with that will keep you accountable to that, so that we don't dance to the beat of somebody else's drum. We really need to understand our own. So that would be my
leadership is hard.
Look after yourselves. Yeah.
Leadership is hard, and burnout is something we struggle with in any role.
Burnout's real.
And leadership can put a lot of pressure, but we can
do it.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but can be so effective once done properly, if that makes sense.
And with support.
Yeah, totally. Maz, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. You are a rock
been super
star.
Fun. I think it's the first time I've officially choked publicly.
When did you choke? Choke. The cool thing about this is it's live, right? So I think that's the best thing about it. These little things.
You have the best camera and microphone of any guest we've had. I think you're presenting as like a well-rounded newsreader on this episode.
I'll take that compliment.
Can hear you clearly. Yeah. You look, it looks great. It looks very professional.
That's well, thank you very much. I appreciate that very kind and encouraging feedback.
No, thank you, Maz. But I tell you what, for all of our listeners out there, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, with my main man, Photon John, and this is Neurodivergent Mates. Till next time.
Thanks for having us.